Hey everybody, how you doing? Dr. Heldman here, Tech Talk Education. How's it been going? I've been having a good summer myself. In this movie, what I want to do is take you through another Try Hack Me room. This one is called Session Management. It's just chock full of good information. Let's get started. Well, first of all, I want you to know that I am not paid by TryHackMe at all. They're not somebody that pays me to advertise these people. I just really, really like them. I'll tell you what, I started messing with TryHackMe several years ago. I think it was more of a younger fledgling company. Through the years, they have really, really built themselves up. Today, I think they're a powerhouse in terms of learning cybersecurity education. I think you're probably better off here paying the $100 a year or so for an annual subscription. You're going to get more stuff here than you're going to get in a college degree in cybersecurity. So I really recommend these guys. They've been very good. As I said, it's about $100 a year. They have a sale on right now. And you can see here that I'm pointing to where it says premium room. That means that I paid the $100 for a year-long subscription. You can pay it monthly if you'd like. And so I'm able to get into these rooms, and these are training rooms, and they're very, very good. So let's get started. I want to go through a couple of these things. There's some super, super good information in this particular session management room that's going to help you understand a little bit more about the way that the web works. So as you know, if you've used TryHackMe before, these rooms have different tasks. So you start at task 1 and go on down. You can see that I've brought this to a successful conclusion. That's really good. Let's go into the introduction and take a look at this. So they're saying here that in this room you're going to learn about a thing called session management. Now this is when you're working with web applications. So the idea here is that there are people that are called front-end web developers, back-end web developers, middleware web developers. There's all of these developers now that are working on ways to get applications brought to you on the web rather than installing an application on your computer. This, of course, is different than creating a phone app, which also has to occasionally talk to the web. But in this case, we're talking about some sort of a web app. I'm just going to call it an app from here on out. And you know that you have to type in a username and password. And then you don't type that in every time. You know, it's not prompting you every time for your username and password. After you are authenticated, you are provided with what is called a session. The session is used to keep track of your state, meaning what are you doing with me right now, track your actions, decide whether or not you're allowed to go do what you're trying to do, and session management aims to ensure that those steps are performed correctly. For example, I ran off and left this logged in last night, probably the wrong thing to do, but I was tired. I come in this morning and of course it's logged out, which is exactly what you would want it to do. So they give you some prereqs here. They're telling you that there's an introduction to web hacking prereq you should probably go through, and enumeration and brute forcing. And this was a very, very good room as well. I've done a video on that. So the idea is that we're supposed to understand what session management is, the differences between authentication and authorization. Notice here that this is spelled with an S. It's not a big deal. TryHackMe is in the UK, and they spell things a little bit differently. Like we put a Z in there for authorization. They don't call it Z, they call it Z. And then they spell authorization with an S. Not a big deal. Just be aware that these are British folks and that they're maintaining this site in the UK. You learn about 2 main session management methods, session management lifecycle, and how to practically exploit vulnerable session management implementations. That's the goal. Even if you're working in cybersecurity and you're not a bad guy, what you want to do is part of your goal is to find out what vulnerabilities there are with an app or whatever's going on, so that you can fix that vulnerability. That's a big part of what cybersecurity ops people do. Then all you have to do is just click the correct answer button. It doesn't say correct answer, you just click answer, and it'll say correct answer because it's telling you that there's no answer needed. Now this is really good. What is session management? Well, it's a 4-part thing, and they're showing you the session management life cycle here. So it starts with the creation of a session, and then we're going to track how the session's going. Then at some point the session is going to time out, which means that we're going to terminate the session. There's some very, very good literature here, but before I get down into that, I want you to know here, to look at this sentence here. The HTTP protocol is inherently stateless. What does that mean? Well, it means that HTTP is just going to take us to a web page, and then the page is going to do stuff. It's not going to keep track of what we're doing. We have to have some other method to do that. Now I'm going to click this because this leads you to some really interesting other information here. So it says HTTP specifies how a web browser and a web server communicate. Your web browser requests content from the TryHackMe web server, so they're giving themselves as an example, using the HTTP protocol. Now later on, I really recommend that you study the HTTP 1.1 and version 2 protocols. That's an important thing to understand, but they're going to talk to you, they're going to point you to the Mozilla developer pages to tell you about some of these things, to tell you how they work. Those are very, very good pages. You know, the Mozilla is responsible for Firefox. They too are based in the UK. Tremendous development pages. The developer pages are very, very good. And so this is a good thing that they're giving you links like that. Let's talk about the session creation. So we're talking about what is called the session management life cycle. It's 4 parts. The life cycle starts only after you provide your credentials, such as your username and password. However, on many web applications, the initial session is already created once you visit the application. So the session is kicked in, but it has not yet prompted you for your username and password. For example, if you were to visit TryHackMe, a session would kick in and you're considered to be a free customer. You'll have to create an account, of course, but you're welcome to look around the TryHackMe page and they still have a session that they're managing. So some applications want to track your actions even before you authenticate. Now we've got to get accustomed to this word authentication and authorization. Authentication is the process of giving it your username and your password, and the system is saying, yep, I've got you in the database, I know who you are, I will log you on. That is not authorization. Authorization is saying, okay, what are you allowed to do? For example, if you're a free tier customer on TryHackMe, you have a session running, you're doing everything for free, you have an account that you have created, but you're not able to get into the premium rooms because you haven't paid for the premium fee. So you're not authorized to get into the premium room. So there's a difference between authentication and authorization. So we're going to talk about authenticated sessions here. Once you provide a username and password, you receive a thing called a session value that is sent with each new request. These session values are generated, used, and stored as crucial in securing session creation. So we're talking about what is called a session. You go out to the web, you want to work with this website, maybe you have a logon, maybe you don't, maybe you're going to create a logon. The session is started and it's keeping track of everything that you're doing. Now under session tracking, once you receive a session value, this is submitted with each new request. This allows the web app to track your actions even though the HTTP protocol is stateless. Now you notice some dots under here. If I click this, it gives me the same thing as I had before. It's telling you that HTTP is stateless in nature. With each request made, the web app can recover the session value from the request and perform a server-side lookup to understand who the session belongs to and what permissions they have. You will have to get used to this terminology because we've got client-side, server-side. So client-side is you. You're going out to the web, you want to work on a website. The server has a bunch of code on it that's responding to your interaction with that website, and we're saying that that is server-side. So it does what's called a server-side lookup. What that means is that there's information in a database that the system is looking up about you to figure out who you are and things like that. So it needs to understand who the sessions belong to and what permissions that they have. In the event that there are issues in the session tracking that may allow a threat actor, this is going to be a phrase you're going to see TryHackMe repeat a lot. A threat actor is a bad guy that wants to do something with your session. For example, maybe they want to hijack your session. Why? Well, maybe they can get credit card information, or maybe it's a jumping off point where they could get into the actual TryHackMe servers or whatever. Or they could try and impersonate a session, which means that they're going to go out and be like you. They're going to try and impersonate you. Now again, they give you these 4 dots because the HTTP session is stateless. It may be happen that a user of a web application all of a sudden stops using it. My wife hollers, "Honey, it's time for dinner." Yeah, so I get up out of my chair. I'm starving. I'm going to go up and get dinner. I leave the session running. Super common, I know. For example, you close a tab on your entire browser. You do this. I'm sure you do this. I've done this before. You've got a bunch of browser tabs open. You've got this session running inside this browser tab. You don't bother to close it, close the tab, or if you do close the tab, the session stays open. So it's things like that that we have to track. Since the protocol is stateless, the web app has no method to know that this action has occurred because it's stateless. This is where a thing called session expiry or session expiration comes into play. The session value itself should have a lifetime attached to it. If the lifetime expires and you submit an old session value, the web app is going to say, nope, I can't do that. I don't know who that is. It's going to deny the session. Instead, you'll be redirected to a logon page to authenticate again. And then we've got session termination. The user might forcibly perform a logout action in the event that this occurs, and the web application should terminate the user's session. This is similar to session expiry. It is unique in the sense that even if the session's lifetime is still valid, the session itself should be terminated. In other words, yes, log out. Now I know that you know this because you go to banking sites or whatever, and you're like, oh, I can't leave this logged on. I'm doing stock transactions or whatever. You make sure that you log out of that, which terminates the session. But there might be sessions out there that you're engaged with that you don't log out of, and you really should, because it's in danger of being stolen, an impersonation happening, somebody hijacking your session, that sort of an idea. And what would happen is, if it's not terminated, the threat actor could gain persistent access to the account. So they're going to talk about what goes on in this room. Now you can see here that I've got the questions already answered. I've been through this room. I passed this room. I'm going to cover up these answers because I want you to go and answer the questions yourselves. And if I'm being honest with you, this information was thorough enough that I had to actually go and take it a couple of times. So there are a couple of questions that I missed, and I had to go reread the information to be able to get it correct. Okay, now we're in the session that says authentication versus authorization. This is very, very good. I like this a lot. This is a 4-part model. I'm going to bring it up just a little tiny bit more. And you can see that we have identification, authentication, authorization, and I love this drawing here. They're showing you that you're keying in data, or you're interacting with the web app in some way that there's data being generated. For example, you're buying a book on Amazon. It's generating data about what's in your shopping cart, your credit card information, your delivery information, etc. So there's a lot of data passing over the wire. And then there's this notion of accountability. So what are these? Well, first of all is identification. It is verifying that you are who you say you are. Now, in most web applications, this is accomplished by you submitting your username. You are claiming that you're the person associated with this specific username. Some applications, I'm sure you've experienced that, do use uniquely created usernames, where others will take your email address as the username. Now, there's a new thing going on. I like it a lot, and I use it. I'm sure there's probably an inherent danger to that I haven't thought about. It's called SSO, single sign-on. There are lots of people involved with this, like Google does this. Microsoft has something like this. There are others. So SSO is a great thing because you already have a Gmail account. Maybe you have Gmail or whatever. And so what you can do is you can log in with your Gmail username and Google is handling the logon for you using your Gmail account and your logon information that way. That is called SSO. That is different than typing in your username and password at a given site, because what SSO does is it's utilizing your username and your password, but it can do it with a bunch of different sites, not just one. Personally, I love SSO. If I got the opportunity to do that, I will, but I will not do that with sites that I know have to be heavily secure. Like, I'm not going to use this on a stock trading app or a medical app or something like that. So the first part is identification. The second part is authentication. That is ensuring that you are who you say you are. Now, in identification, you provide a username. For authentication, you provide proof of who you are, typically like with a password associated with the username. The web application can confirm this information and is valid. This is the point where the session creation would kick in. Now, keep in mind, some sessions kick in prior to that, but in this case, the session kicks in as soon as you have validated yourself to the app. Then there's what is called authorization. This is the process of ensuring that you have access to the things that you have been given access to and know more. This is a very, very strong concept in cybersecurity. It's called least privilege. What we want to do is we want to give you the least amount of privileges that you require to be able to go about doing your work in this web app and no more. We don't want to give you so many permissions that you can go run willy-nilly across a website and do things that are damaging. That would be very bad juju indeed. So, for an example, while all users may view data, only a select few may modify the data. In the session management lifecycle, session tracking plays a critical role in authorization. So authentication is, here's who I am, username, password, boom, I'm logged in. Now here's what I can do. This is my authorization. I'm a premium member in TryHackMe, so I can go do premium rooms. If you're a free tier member in TryHackMe, you can only do the free rooms. And then there's this idea of accountability. So what accountability means is that the process of creating a record of actions. You know, we say a lot anymore, I'm being tracked. Well, yeah, you actually are being tracked. So what's happening is there are logs that are being put on the server about the transactions that you're doing, the things that you're doing, and if something untoward happened, we can go back and we can look at those logs and try and figure out what happened. Okay, I've gone on to task number 4 here now, and this is about cookies versus tokens. This is super interesting. The first 2 of these pages were to just get you into the concept of these web app sessions. Now we're talking about how we do that. One of the ways that we can do that is we can drop a cookie. So cookie-based session management is pretty old school right now for managing sessions. Still a lot of that going on. I'm not saying it's gone away, but it's a little bit older than the new way of dropping tokens. Once the web app wants to begin tracking, in response, a thing called a set cookie header is given to you. Now, what does this mean? Well, in the HTTP spec, there are these different headers that you can pass in via your web page, and there's one called set cookie. And you can see here that it is proper case, set tag cookie, colon, and then you tell it the session name and the session number. So in this case, set cookie session 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, your browser creates this cookie entry. So you've got to keep in mind, it's not the web server that's doing it, it's your browser that's doing it. It's creating what's called a session value, which will be valid for the domain where the cookie was received from. This is very important here. You need to focus in on this idea of domain. So what a domain is, in the Windows Server world, it has a little bit different meaning, but in the case of the web, what we're talking about is what website you're trying to hit. Microsoft.com, Apache.com, etc., etc. That is a domain name, and so this session here is only valid for the domain where the cookie was received from. So it has to do with the domain as well. The other thing you should be aware of is this thing right here is called an attribute. So when you hear that word attribute, what it means is I'm tacking on things that are going to get plugged into this that can be used for this particular session. This is very, very common in HTML, and they give you several others here, like for example secure. If I have a secure attribute, that indicates that the browser, that the cookie can only be transmitted over verified HTTPS channels, meaning that I've got a certificate that is valid for this channel. If there are certificate errors or HTTP natively is used, the cookie value will not be transmitted. There's one called HTTP only that allows you to only be read by client-side JavaScript. Let's take a minute here. One of the most important programming languages you can learn, especially if you're going to be messing around with the web, is JavaScript. It's what's driving the majority of what's going on in the world's web servers, and it's very, very important. Your browser is able to read JavaScript. Servers can issue JavaScript commands. So we're saying here that the cookie value may not be read by client-side JavaScript. And this is important because if you were hacked, somebody could grab that cookie, they could see that JavaScript that's doing that, grab that, and do something malicious with it. Here's your expiration attribute. And here's a thing called same site. The cookie may be transmitted in cross-site request to help prevent against cross-site request forgery attacks. So the idea is I grab your cookie information, I go somewhere else, and I'm doing a cross-site sort of attack, and that is very possible. So same site means that we're going to stay on the site here. Let me show you some more of these. So this is called a header here, this set cookie thing, and you can see that there are numerous attributes that are available for the set cookie header. So I've got a cookie name and a cookie value. That's the first thing that we looked at. Here's where I can pass in the domain name that I'm after. I can set the expires date. I can say HTTP only. I can give the cookie a max age where it just ages out. I can do a partitioning on this thing. I can give it a path that I want to go down. I can say that it is secure. You get the idea. So there are a bunch of different values that we can pass in with this set cookie header. Now the set cookie header was introduced in request for comment. This is called a request for comment, 2109, 1997. You could go out and actually look that up and go read that RFC. They're all available online, and it was updated in RFC 6265. It's now a well-established part of HTTP 1.1, and now there's an HTTP 2 standard, so you really should go out and read about those standards. Okay, now that was a cookie. What about a token? So it's a new concept. It's a relatively new concept, I say. Instead of using the browser's automatic cookie management features, and anytime I hear that where it's automatic and it's going to kick in, I know that I've got to be concerned about, well, is it going to do things that I may not want it to do? It's something you're going to have to be careful with, especially if you're working with cybersecurity. It relies on client-side code for the process. Now, hear what it's saying here. So there is some client-side, meaning on your computer, JavaScript code that is handling this token. After authentication, I've logged on, my username, my password are good. It provides a token within the request body. So what I'm saying is, I've got this token that I've built. I've logged onto the site, and now I've got this request out there. This token is stored in an area called the browser's local storage. Pay attention to that wording as cap L, cap S. I always check this stuff when I'm doing technical things like this to find out if it needs to be all caps, proper case, lowercase, whatever. When a new request is made, JavaScript code must load the token from storage. So this thing is sitting in local storage, and you attach it as a header to the page that you're sending to the server. One of the most common types of token is called a JSON Web Token, a JWT. What is JSON? JSON is an add-on for JavaScript. It's called JavaScript Object Notation. It's fabulous. Listen, if you go take an HTML class, CSS, JavaScript, You're going to get really, really familiar with JSON. I love JSON. And what's happening here is we're using JSON to build a web token for ourselves, and it's called a JWT. And these are passed through a header called authorization:"bearer. So this is a relatively new header. However, as we are not using the browser's built-in cookie management features, it's a bit of a wild west where anything goes. Although there are standards, nothing is really forcing anything from sticking to these standards. Now, you should pay attention to this because right now, the day that this was developed and even up to now, we haven't had a lot of standardization in these areas. And so this is why THM is telling you, well, this is kind of a wild west right now. This is something you really need to pay attention to. They give you a good little chart here. So under cookie session management, the cookie is automatically sent by the browser with each request. A token has to be submitted as a header, and each request using client-side JavaScript. It's not server-side, it's client-side JavaScript. Cookie attributes can be used to enhance the browser's protection of the cookie. Tokens do not have automatic security protections enforced and should therefore be safeguarded against disclosures. Cookies can be vulnerable to conventional client-side attacks, such as this guy here. It's called the cross-site request forgery. It's known as the CSRF. This is a web vulnerability that allows an attacker to induce users to perform actions that they do not intend to perform. It allows an attacker to partly circumvent the same origin policy, which is designed to prevent different websites from interfering with each other. I'm sure that you're going to wind up having to go through a class on CSRF. It's something that and cross-site scripting, these are big topics in the cybersecurity arena. Making sure websites are secure is an enormous topic, and there's a lot of people that are invested in this. As the token is not automatically added to any request and cannot be read from local storage by other domains. That's the value add feature with the token. You can't, you go out to try hack me, you give it your token. You can't use the same token when you're going out to Amazon, for example. This will supposedly help prevent CSRF attacks. All cookies are locked to a specific domain. It can be difficult to use them securely in decentralized web applications. What do we mean by that? Well, I log on here, and then I've got to go to this site and do some things, and I've got to go over here and do some things. It's decentralized. A cookie's not going to work well in an environment like that. Tokens, on the other hand, do work well in a decentralized web application. They are managed through JavaScript and can often contain all the information required to verify the token itself, which means that if somebody were to get onto your computer and could then get into this local storage and find these things, could be that there might be some issues there. That's why we are so interested in making sure that we are protecting our computers from bad guys that want to get into them. Now, this will be the last slide for this movie. I feel that I'm going to have to, because there is an exercise here that we've got to go into, and it's relatively deep, so I'm going to use another movie to explain what it is that we're doing, because when you go in here and you're trying to work in this stuff, you might get lost. So we've got a lot of things that create vulnerabilities inside the session, and the session could be with a cookie or it could be with a token. Either way is going to work for us. First of all, if we have weak session values, in other words, we've keyed in things that are easy to discover. In modern times, we use what are called frameworks, and those frameworks have pretty much standardized ways of operating. So that could be bad. However, with the rise of these large language models, the ChatGPTs of the world, and other AI code assistant solutions, you would be surprised at how often the old school vulnerabilities can be started to creep back in. If custom session creation mechanism has been implemented, there's a good chance that the session values will be guessable. A good example of this is a mechanism that simply base4 encodes the username as a session value. You can actually go out to websites, just look for base64 encoding. You can type in your name, encode it in base64. You could use that as a session value, Bad idea. If somebody recognizes that it's base 64, they can decode it very, very simply. If a threat actor can reverse engineer the session creation process, they can generate or guess session values to hijack the accounts of legitimate users. There's also the controllable session values, like in certain tokens, such as JSON web tokens. All the relevant information to both create and verify the JWT's validity is provided. So it's a one-stop shopping environment. Here you go. Here's the full freight that you need to get this thing going. If security measures are not enforced, such as verifying the token's signature, meaning I've got a certificate that's validating this token, or ensuring that the signature itself is created securely, a threat actor would be able to generate their own token. There's a thing called session fixation. Remember the web application that already gave you a session before authentication? Bad idea. These web applications can be vulnerable to something called session fixation. If your session value is not adequately rotated once you authenticate, a suitably positioned threat actor could record it when you are still unauthenticated and wait for you to authenticate to gain access. So it's really not a good idea to gen up this session before we're actually logged in, or to keep that session once we are logged in. It would be okay if we genned up the session, now I log in, okay, now I create a new session, that would be okay, but to just leave it open is not a good idea. You also have what is called insecure session transmission. In modern environments, it's common for the authentication server and the application server to be distinct. If you think about it, right, a lot of these sites are so enormous that you have to have servers that do nothing but authenticate users, and then other servers that are serving up the application itself. Now this is where single sign-on comes in. I love single sign-on. I use Google single sign-on quite a bit, and I enjoy that, but I don't use it for sites that I know are very, very important, where somebody could get in and really get the goods on me. One application is used for authentication for several web applications. Personally, I like SSO, but they have some good information here that you're giving you. So the most common insecurity is an insecure redirect implementation, which means that we're insecure, we're going to redirect you, and this happened to Oracle. They had an SSO solution that had a massive bug that allowed this to happen. What does that mean? Well, it means that in order for the process to work, your session material must be transferred from the authentication server to the application server via your browser. So the browser is doing all the work. You go out to this server, you authenticate, now you get transferred over to the actual application server. And this would be if you had an insecure redirect and you're using SSO, you could get into a lot of trouble with that. So please go carefully with SSO. Like I said, I'm a fan. I use Google SSO quite a bit. When I can, I do use it, but I do not use it for sites that I really rely on and they might have more information than I want to actually give out. Now there's another thing that you can do that is a vulnerability that is called session tracking. So the first one is called authorization bypass. Authorization bypasses occur where there aren't sufficient checks being performed on whether a user is allowed to perform the action they requested. So you got to remember back, we have authentication. Yes, now I'm an authenticated user. You know my username, you know my password, everything's cool, here's the token, here's the cookie, whatever. Now, what can I do? And if the controls over watching what the user is doing are weak, it could be that they can get into areas that they shouldn't be allowed to get into. This is called authorization bypass. What it means is that it fails to track the user session and his or her associated rights correctly. There are two types of authorization bypasses. Now, a vertical bypass is where you can perform an action that gains you access as a more privileged user. This is the bailiwick of hacker guys. They get in as you don't have a whole lot of rights. They experiment around, look around, play a little bit. The next thing you know, they're in as an administrator, and now they can do all kinds of damage. There's also a horizontal bypass where there are other people on the system, and you can hop over and become another person on the system. That's called a horizontal bypass. Vertical bypasses are easy to defend against. However, with horizontal bypasses, the user is performing an action they should be allowed to perform. The issue is that they're performing it on someone else's data. So I think that this is excellent. I think they've done a really good job of writing about these things. There's also insufficient logging. Okay, you know what, you're authorized, but I'm not logging the transactions. Why am I not doing that? Well, because it's going to weigh down the server. The server's real busy doing all kinds of things. Even load balance servers could get into something like this, where we have 30 or 40 servers that are dishing out this application. They're responsible for logging. You could still load it down if there was a lot of logging going on. A key issue during incidents is not having sufficient information to piece together an attack. This is why logging is so important. While a lot of logging will occur at the infrastructure level, what they mean by that is that the server is automatically doing a bunch of logging. Well, application level logging can be crucial to understanding what went wrong. In the event that the actions were performed by a specific session and the ability to retrace that session do not exist, it leaves gaps in an investigation that cannot be filled. It's also worth making sure that the logs cover both accepted and rejected actions. Typically, when you're going in and you're looking at these logs, you're going to be looking for the rejections that happen. What happened here? But when a bad guy gets in and you see some success logs, that's going to be something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. In the event of a session hijacking attack, the actions would appear legitimate. Therefore, simply logging rejected actions is not sufficient. And then we can mess around with session expiry. It only has a single vulnerability. That's when the expiration time for sessions are excessive. And what happens here, if you're asking me, is administrators get lazy. They're like, I don't want to pay attention to that all the time. That's just too much. I'll just set it real long, and that way you can just keep it. It's the same thing with passwords. A lot of times administrators in a corporation will allow users to keep very, very long passwords and not have to change them. Why? Because the user complains because they have to change their passwords so frequently. I love this analogy. A session should be seen as a ticket to a movie. Each night the same movie is shown, but we don't want someone to use the same ticket to watch the movie again. So I go and I watch, Mission Impossible. I love this latest Mission Impossible, super good. Well, I take my ticket and I go back into the theater and I watch it again the next night. No, you can't do that. This same counts for sessions. We need to make sure that our session expiration time takes into consideration our specific application's use case. A banking application should have a shorter session lifetime than your webmail client, right? I mean, that makes sense. And finally, session termination. The key issue is when sessions are not properly terminated server side when the logout action is performed. So you did your duty, you logged out of the app, but on the server, it did not log you out for whatever reason. They say, suppose, for example, that a threat actor were to hijack a user session. In that case, even if the user became aware of the issue, without the ability to invalidate that session on the server side, there isn't a method for the user to flush the access of the threat actor. This can be quite an issue for tokens where the lifetime of the token is embedded in the token itself. In these cases, the token can be added to a block list to be verified against. Some applications also take this further, where all the sessions of the user can be viewed and terminated. I like that idea, but of course it makes more work for the administrator, and of course it's going to load down the server because the server is responsible for doing a lot more work. Furthermore, upon successful password reset, it's recommended that all sessions are terminated to allow a user to regain full control of their account. Okay, now that was really good. Why did I do this? Well, because if you're like me, you might tend to blow through a lot of the writing that's going on. You're like, oh, it's a lot of writing. I don't want to do that. But with the TryHackMe stuff, if you really want to learn this stuff like really deep, and I'm going to tell you again, I've told you before, cybersecurity is one of the most technically difficult arenas you can get into. You have to be a subject matter expert for a ton of things. So you've got to read these documents that TryHackMe has put out. They're very, very good, and what I would recommend doing is I would recommend that you go to all of the links that they give you and ask yourself questions. Okay, they're mentioning this. Why is this? Go out to this Mozilla website, this developer website, and read more about it and really deepen your knowledge of what it is that they're talking about here. This is not a game. TryHackMe is a gamified educational institution, and what it's trying to do is getting you to the point where you're a subject matter expert in cybersecurity, and I hope you do that as well. So if you've enjoyed this movie, please do me a favor, like it, subscribe to my channel. I am trying to grow the channel. You're welcome to share this with others. You're welcome to comment on this. And now in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to get going on the actual work that has to happen within this room to be able to get the flag that we're looking for. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye-bye.